Let's talk about the Indian Shield. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now this video is inspired by my friend and colleague Ranjit Singh, so I'll stick a link to his website below. I want to make it absolutely categorically clear that this video was inspired by conversation with him about my Indian shields, and he is an absolute expert on Indian arms and armour. I'm not. I have a working knowledge, but I'm not an expert on it. Ranjit, in contrast, is an absolute expert on Indo-Persian weapons, and as you'll check out on his website below, and you might recognise him from the Antiques Roadshow as well if you watched that. So he noticed in one of my recent videos in the background an Indian dial, which many of you will have noticed as well. You might even notice that I have a modern replica for training purposes in my other filming spot in my garage. But he wanted to see my dial, so we shared them, and he shared some information with me. So some of what I say here comes from him, but if I say anything wrong, I don't want you to hold that against him, because that might be me rather than him. So anyway, maybe at some point we can get Ranjit onto this channel. It'd be fantastic. I'm trying to make a big push with this channel of getting more experts onto here, because I think it's really important to have experts talk about the subjects that they are experts in. I try to never pretend to be an expert in something that I'm not, okay? If I'm an expert in anything, it's British military swords. Right, so onto these. So these are commonly referred to as dal. They can go by other names as well. If this was in Persia, they might be, I think it's a sepa. So depending on what language or dialect you're speaking, they might be known as different things, but very commonly these are referred to as a dal or shield, if we just want to call it. Let's just use the English word for this. So this is a characteristic style of Indian shield. Now this is a particularly large one. I won't say it's the biggest. You certainly do get bigger ones, but they all share similar features, or at least a lot of them share similar features. So for the most part, they are convex, okay? They are convex dome. They are circular for the most part. For the most part, they have either 4 or 6 bosses on the front, and those bosses correspond to rings and sort of almost like a rivet essentially on the inside here, where the straps that you hold the shield are connected. Now, if there are 6, what we end up is a long rectangular line. If there are 4, you end up with a square, and in the middle of that is a padded, usually leather, sometimes fabric, little spot there, which your fist rests against. Now, we're going to see somewhere the handles are still intact in a minute, but the handles go from top to bottom on each side, and you grip them both together so your fist is against there. So this is very much like a boss gripped shield that we would find in the Anglo-Saxon or Viking period, or indeed Roman era in Europe. This type of shield, this particular setup, very characteristic, round, convex, 4 or 6 bosses, the rings at the back with the little pad and the straps to hold, is a type of shield that we find not just in India, but we find it in a lot of Islamic countries in the Middle East as well. You find it in Persia. And I believe, Ranjit could probably clarify on this, but I believe this is a style of shield which comes into India from the Persian world via the Mughals. I believe probably in the 16th century, maybe 15th century. So before that, there were other types of shield in use in India, more oblong shields, I think, as far as I've seen. Right, so this particular round type of shield became very popular, I believe, in the 16th century in India, and spread all over India in different styles. So you get different styles in different places. We'll talk about that in a second. And they're used, used by all types of both horsemen and people on foot. It became the universal standard Indian shield. So by the time people like the British and the Dutch turned up in India, this was what pretty much all Indian people were armed with in terms of shields. And most of them are made of some form of hide. Now it's very clear when you look at these, this is probably, I'm guessing, something like buffalo hide. They vary in thickness and they vary in surface, they vary in type of leather. So different types of animals would have been used, sometimes buffalo, sometimes probably rhino, maybe occasionally elephant. Various different creatures would have been used for different shields. The general rule that I've observed is, generally speaking, the bigger the shield is, the thinner it is, and that's probably a weight issue. So this is actually relatively thin. That's probably about 6 or 7 millimeters thick there, so it's still fairly thick leather. It's thicker than your belt, and it's hardened, and then it is painted and treated in certain ways, often decorated as this is. And of course the bosses are made of metal. They're usually either iron or steel, or they're brass usually. And they can obviously also be made of rich metals like silver or gold. So they're pretty much always hide, but not always, and we're going to look at some exceptions to that. So let's have a quick rattle through and look at some others and some variations. I'll just put the big one down. That's the biggest one I own, and that's, generally speaking, is about 2 feet across. That's about as large as they get. And also remember, because they're held in the fist, both the big ones and the small ones, they are often held at arm's length. So you'd strike with both hands coming out, and if you look at Gaka or Shasta Vidya, you'll see often the two things are kept close. And they're often then extended out in motion, sometimes together or sometimes taking turns, sometimes defend, attack. So they are used very actively to strike, to bat aside, to punch even, and to intercept incoming blows. So they're not just held there like a static thing. Right, another example here. This is a poorer quality one, shall we say. It's a more like a working man's one. And with just little simple iron bosses there, and it has the remains of a strap. And you'll also notice that the pad has, where the leather's got old and dry, has broken open, and inside is very clearly some form of hair. I would imagine horsehair. Now, horsehair in the historical world, up until the invention of things like foam and things like that, horsehair was the pretty much standard padding material throughout the historical world, across the world. It's very, very good. You can use wool, that could even be wool, but wool or horsehair, something like this, it's a very good shock absorber, and they even used to make boxing gloves and padded, you know, cushions on furniture, all sorts of stuff is padded with animal hair. So that's what that padded with. We've got 4 rings, standard setup, and the remains of a leather strap here, which is very stiff, very old leather. Both of these are probably 19th century, could be anywhere in the 1800s, and they're pretty simple fighting shields. Right, to put that one down, pick another one up here. Now this is interesting. This is very clearly made of a very different type of hide. Now I don't know what animal this is from, but this is really thick. I mean, that's best part of a centimetre thick, and it's heavy. For its size, it's really heavy. And you'll see it's warped. It originally would have been perfectly circular and domed, but you know, a bit of moisture gets into these, and they heat up and cool down over the course of how long they've been around. This one is 19th century again. These are probably Rajput, according to Ranjit. Now, I don't know, okay? So that was just a quick conversation. So again, if he wants to clarify any of that or change his mind, that's his prerogative, and I don't want you to hold him to it. But my understanding is the ones I've shown so far are probably Rajput and probably 19th century, rather than 18th century or later 20th century. We'll talk about 20th century in a minute. So this is more, you'll notice the surface of this, it looks almost like elephant hide. And for all I know, it could be. This could be elephant hide. It is really, really thick and really, really heavy. So obviously there's always a trade-off. You make a shield stronger, but you also make it heavier. And bear in mind, you're holding these in the fist and you're holding them out, using them like a bit like a buckler, like a European buckler. So you make it heavier, you might make it slower, but it's far more durable and would stop arrows and all kinds of stuff. I don't think you'd shoot an arrow through this at all. Very, very hard. And it has the texture of something like Kydex or something like that. It's really, really tough, almost like plastic. The back side, interestingly, so if you look at the front side, you can see this kind of surface to the skin. That is very clearly the outside of the animal skin, and this is the inside of the animal skin. And you'll notice this still has 2 grips fully remaining on it. Now, I don't know if they're original, but they certainly look old, and the leather is very stiff. I wouldn't treat those or touch those or do anything to those because it's too fragile and they might fall apart. So all I do is I just clean it up, keep the cobwebs off it, and leave it as is in a house with a fairly average level of humidity and heat. Okay, again, the padding is broken open here from the age of the leather, and you can see the hair, the probably horsehair, possibly wool, inside the pad there. So this is a heavy one, and it's a bit misshapen. Right, let's look at the next one. These actually, so this, I'm going to go to this one next. So this one is particularly interesting because instead of 4 bosses, it has 6. Now, one is missing up here, but there should be a line of 6. Now, the interesting thing is that means there's correspondingly 6 straps on the inside. One of them, where the one's broken away, has actually come away, but the strap is there. So this does have 6 straps. Now, my observation looking at Indian art is when you have 6 straps, what they're tending to do is slide their hand through the first 2 and grip the last one. This might possibly be, this is just conjecture, this might possibly be related to mounted archery. So the Indians, various different empires in India, did use recurve bows from horseback in the same way that the Persians, the Turks and lots of other people in the Middle East did. So it's entirely possible, looking at Middle Eastern examples, that they did want to sometimes leave the hand free by slipping the hand through so they could grip a bow and use it at the same time. That's just one theory, one idea. It might not be correct, but why else would you have 6 straps on such a small shield? You can imagine having 6 straps on a large shield, but why have it on a small shield? I don't know. This shield is very interesting for a number of other reasons. First of all, the bosses, although they are metal, so just focusing on them, you can see that they're actually painted, and the whole surface of this is decorated with gold coloured paint all the way around the rim, all the way around the centre, all the way around the bosses. They've even gone to the lengths of painting the back of the rim and the inside here. So this is quite, I would suspect, a relatively expensive dull shield buckler for its time. But there's another interesting feature, and this is something some people are really fond of, and I've got to say I quite like it as well. I don't know if you can tell, but it's sort of translucent, okay, not quite transparent, but this hide, whatever this is made of, I've got my Olight here, I'm going to shine it through. Woo, look at that. It shines through the hide. Really, really, really cool. So look, you can actually see the straps and the pad through the material. Really, really nice. And some people really like those sort of translucent ones, really attractive. Right. Right, finally, no, not finally, or getting towards the end, we have 2 here which are painted with hunting scenes, with tigers grabbing deer and all of that kind of thing. Now, these are interesting. They've got pads. They don't have straps or any signs of straps on the back. They do have rings, and they've got little fabric pads. Now, this has actually got a label on it saying Indian 18th century. However, it is thought that these might actually be tourist ones, but still old, still antique. So late 19th or early 20th century ones, possibly made for British travellers to bring home as decorations. And they're very clearly a pair, which would add credence to that theory. They've both got, although they're not, I don't think they're even necessarily painted by the same artist, but they're not exactly the same. But they've both got hunting scenes featuring tigers. So the working theory, and I did suspect this anyway, and I think Ranjit agrees, is that those are probably designed to be sold to British tourists 120 years ago and brought back to Britain to put on the wall to show that they travelled to India. Right, finally, a couple of shields. Now, all of those were hide. These final 2 are steel. And according to Ranjit, this one, and I think probably this one as well, are probably Punjabi, possibly from Sialkot. They're really, really cool. So they're exactly the same shape, exactly the same setup, 4 rings on the back. In this case, entirely fabric covered. You'll notice that this one is about buckler sized. So little, in fact, I just very carefully, in fact, I can't fit my hand in those straps. This might possibly be made for a child rather than a buckler. I don't know, but it's too small for me to get my hands into. But they've got a little pad, fabric covered all the way around, nice fancy. It's got velvet covered. It's quite a fancy one, this. Again, possibly they were made, as fighting shields. Possibly this one was brought for decorative purposes. I don't know. But you'll see the surface of them is completely covered in what I would call koftgari. I'm not 100% sure if that's the correct term. But essentially silver and gold inlaid to the surface, or applied rather to the surface. In both cases, the larger one has darker patina, so there we go. You can see all those lovely decorations. Now I'll just put the one down so I can get a bit closer, but the small one is really super detailed. And if you're interested in Instagram, I do actually I've just put a picture up of this one on Instagram because I was just giving it a clean off. It got a bit dusty, so I gave it a clean off and stuck a picture on Instagram of it. But yeah, it's just beautiful decoration with silver and gold, and obviously chased steel as well. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting. A quick rattle through the overview of some of the wonderful Indian shields or dal that we can find from the 18th, 19th and even early 20th centuries. You can find in the collecting world and in the antiques world. And thanks again to Ranjit for the fantastic chat. I hope to learn lots more about Indian arms and armour from him over the years. He's a great guy. Check out his website. The link's down below, and you can feast your eyes on his magnificent things that he's got on there. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.